Welcome to Strange Dimensions. The interface to alternate realities. Contact experiences. And mysterious phenomena. And now your host for Strange Dimensions Radio. Here's Rosemary Ellen Guiley.
Thank you for being with me. What an exciting evening we've got tonight. We are going to be looking through the eyes of a very talented medium on what it's like to make contact with the dead, to find out what's worrying them, the messages they want to get across, and some very poignant stories about the forgotten dead. My guest tonight is Karl Petry. First, a little news on my end. I'm literally on the road tonight. I am going to Mothman, the Mothman Festival down in Point Pleasant, West Virginia this weekend. In fact, Karl's going to be there too. He's doing some filming with me for a couple of filming projects. And this year is the 50th anniversary of the Mothman sightings in the Mid-Ohio River Valley. 1966 to 67 put a lot of paranormal things on the map when this winged humanoid suddenly started appearing up and down the river valley, terrorizing people. There was a huge wave of UFO sightings, mysterious craft, contact with beings who called themselves aliens, men in black, poltergeist phenomena. It was a wild place for 13 months, and it was made famous by John Keel's book, The Mothman Prophecies, which was turned into a film. And every year since 2002, there has been a festival there, which has grown quite a bit in size. And this year, we're bracing ourselves because that little town is expected to get between 5,000 and 8,000 people. This is a free festival. And we have talks that go on all day in the State Theater in town. I'm giving a talk on who is Mothman, some explanations that we can consider for trying to figure out what exactly this entity was that all of a sudden disappeared at the end of 13 months. And even though there have been Mothman sightings around the world since then, there hasn't been anything that quite duplicated that 13-month wave. So 15th anniversary for the festival, 50th year anniversary for Mothman. Last weekend I was in Canton, Ohio at a seance. I was not doing the seance. For once I was a guest. And it was a great evening. Laura Lynn was the medium at a haunted location, the Canton Women's Club. And we had a great dinner and a great seance, and Laura did the amazing job of doing platform messages for about 35 to 40 people there. Every single person got a message. So I'm looking forward to going back there. I'm going to be doing some of my own events in that venue. Then we have Halloween coming up in October. More on my road travel plans at a later show. I want to bring my guest on now. I have known Karl Petry for a good number of years, and in fact, we got acquainted through our mutual interest in the paranormal investigations. And he has a very unusual ability. He's an excellent medium, and he has an unusual ability for retrocognition, that is, seeing into the past. And some of the details that Karl can see in terms of what life looked like at an earlier time, even the activities and the people down to minute details, it's a very rare ability. Karl has worked on crime cases. He's done paranormal investigations. We've shared some investigations on some unusual cases we're going to be talking about tonight. He is now an author. He has published his autobiography and some of his most startling cases, titled Absent Witness, and this book is just out this summer from Visionary Living. There is a proposed television show in the works based on Karl's life and his cases, also called Absent Witness, and we'll find out exactly what that term means. But I'd like to bring Karl on now so we can talk about some of his abilities and his cases. And also, he's got a lot to say about how we regard the dead and even how we treat the dead. Karl, welcome.
Good evening, and it's a pleasure being on the show.
Well, thank you very much. I'm so excited to have you on. It was such a treat to see your book come out. I know you worked a very long time on it. And you've got some amazing cases in there, all kinds of cases about how you've dealt with communicating with the dead. And I think they give we on the other side a lot of pause for thought in terms of how we treat the dead, how burials are conducted, what happens to burial sites. And one of the things that has really gotten my attention is how the voice of the dead can be heard. And probably a lot of us could hear that voice if we only listened. But fortunately, we have people like you with great mediumistic ability who can pick up on what the dead are urgently trying to say to the living. Now, Karl, your ability started very early in life. And how did that unfold for you?
Well, you see, when I was growing up, I figured that, everybody had this ability. I would see things, hear things, and, when I was growing up very young, when I would say something, they would say, "Oh, we don't see that. What are you talking about?" I recall I went to a Catholic school for a number of years, and I was in the fourth grade, and I was sitting at my desk overlooking the street, and across the street, I could see the men building the houses. Now, the houses were built in the 1920s. So I'm watching the way they're lifting up the wood on these hoists, and they're putting it into place. And the nun said to me, "Why are you looking out the window?" And I said, "I'm looking out the window of how they're building the houses across the street." And, of course, she looked out there, and there was nobody building the houses. They were all completed many years ago. And so she said, and then, of course, the class started to laugh. And I didn't understand why they were laughing because I was watching them build the houses. And, I was reprimanded for that. And I just figured, I don't know why these people are just being cruel to me. They're denying that they see the men across the street. And after a while, of course, it would come back to normal, and then I wouldn't see the men anymore. I just was very confused. But I just figured that's just the way life is.
And did you talk about your ability much to your family or to any of your friends at a young age?
No, I didn't, because, I was afraid of ridicule. As these strange things were happening, I wouldn't start telling my family, because they're blue-collar, workers. That's what they think, like, any guy, any kid or their son, whatever, who starts seeing things, there's something wrong with them. And I don't want anything wrong with my son. I don't want anybody to say that my son is strange and he sees things. Remember, we're talking about the 1950s. And that behavior was unacceptable. You had to, be lockstep with everybody else. And if you saw things or heard things, it was looked upon at, Walter's son, there's something wrong with him. There's something mentally wrong with him. And you just keep your mouth shut.
And you grew up in Kearney, New Jersey, in very middle class neighborhood.
Actually, I grew up in Newark, New Jersey.
And you live in Kearney now.
I live in Kearney now. I grew up in Newark, which was a very, very blue collar. It was very industrial. There were factories all over the place. My father worked in Port Elizabeth, the Singer Sewing Machine Company. And my mother worked across the street from our apartment in a Celanese. They were making leatherette, like a phony leather. And she worked there. So this was all around us. Everything was industrial.
Was anyone else in your family gifted in a psychic way?
Yes, I found out that my grandmother on my mother's side, she had it. And I never knew about that until my aunt, my mother's sister, she was on her deathbed. And because I was telling her about things I would see, whatever, and she never had a problem with anything I was talking about. but kept quiet until she was dying on her deathbed. And she said to me, I just want to let you know that my mother or your grandmother had this ability when she was in Europe, and people used to come from miles around to see her. But even back then in the old country, they just sort of like swept it underneath the carpet. We don't want to talk about that. And my mother and her brothers, whatever, would never, ever talk about that.
When you saw these scenes from the past, how did that start? Did you have any physical sensations, or did the present just sort of disappear? Did it fade? Was it suddenly replaced with something from the past?
There's a sort of like step-by-step thing that happens. All the ambient noise that I hear like right now will start getting quieter and quieter and quieter, and then I hear like a high-pitched sound, like a whistle, and that will start coming through, and then as that starts to come through, everything that I'm looking at starts to change. It changes into something from the past. And not only do I see it, I could sense it, I could smell it, I could hear conversations, I hear all this stuff. It happens, when it happens, it's very scary. For example, back in July, I was in a New Jersey seaside resort called Asbury Park. It's made famous by Bruce Springsteen. He used to play there a lot at the Stone Pony. And I was there with some friends, and we were just happened to be walking down the boardwalk, and all of a sudden I looked, and there was a merry-go-round. I mean, it's still there. The building is there. And then I started to hear all the noise starting to go away, and I hear the high-pitched shrill, that sound, and then I started seeing the merry-go-round. I saw what it looked like, and I saw it turning around. I could hear the music, and on the outside I could see a 1946 Pontiac, and all the girls and the guys around there dressed in the 1940s clothes. And to me, it's what I call an episode. My brain was hurting quite a bit, and I walked over to the side, and my wife came up to me, and she says, "You're having a problem right now, aren't you?" And I says, "Yes." And I pointed to the building, and I said, "There's a merry-go-round, and it's spinning around, and it's making this music." And I started describing what I was seeing. Well, the couple that we were with, they're a little bit older than we were, and what I was describing, she said, "You just described exactly what this place used to look like back then." And she says, "I remember the merry-go-round, and you're describing it exactly as if you're standing right in front of it." So, it does come even at the weirdest times. I have no control when it's going to happen.
And these episodes, do they last for a few minutes, or do they go on for a long time? And how do they end?
Let's say like the episode with the merry-go-round, that lasted for about 20 minutes. And as I was looking, it was fading, it was going in and out. I was looking at and I'm saying 1946 because that was the year of the Pontiac that was there. I could recognize cars. So somewhere around 1946 is when this episode was happening. And then I would see it, then it would fade back to normal times, and it would fade back to 1946 and would go back and forth. In the meantime, I was in a tremendous pain, like the ultimate headache. And then after a while, when I got up, I started walking away with these people, and I got probably a quarter mile away from the merry-go-round before I could actually start functioning properly. And other times it could last as little as 10 seconds, but then sometimes it'll last the entire day. I have no control over it.
Parapsychologists have studied this condition called retrocognition, which is literally seeing into the past. And there have been episodes like Karl is describing that have been documented in the parapsychology literature. And it certainly points to the fact that we are in a construct of time, that supposedly everything is happening in an eternal now. And we just don't have the ability to see that. And Karl, have you ever met anyone who has had a similar ability that literally penetrates the veil of time like that?
The only person that I would say comes close to that was a remote viewer by the name of Ingo Swann. We were very good friends, and I recall when I first went to his house, he lived in a Bowery, and he lived in a like a 4-story industrial building, which it was at one time, probably in the 1800s. And when the first time I went there, and of course, I was sitting in his basement, and my head started to hurt, and then I would start looking around, and I could see the machines that were down the basement at one time. And so he said to me, he goes, without me saying a word, he said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "I'm seeing the way this place looked like many, many years ago." And he said, "Describe what you're seeing." And then I pointed at the foot of the stairs, and I said, "There's a workbench there, and there's a man with an apron with black hair, and he's working at this bench." He goes, "What else do you see?" And I turned around, and I said, "There's, at the other end of the basement," I said, "there's more work tables there." And he says, "Okay." And he says, "I see them too." He goes, "I believe the man that you're talking about, his name is Frankie." Now, that was a relief that he actually could see it. And as we were having this discussion, an image of a man walked between us. And I stopped talking, and he says, "What's the matter?" I said, "A man just walked between us." And he said, "I saw him too." Now, Ingo was not a type of person who would just say things. He wouldn't say it unless he meant it. And that was my experience with someone who could see what I was seeing.
Now, a lot of people in our audience are familiar with the name Ingo Swann, but some folks aren't. And what's the significance of Ingo? He's a pretty important figure in remote viewing.
Yes, he was a person that the United States government went to when they wanted to do psychic spying. And he was a remote viewer. I mean, that means he could sit in the case, like he would go down into a room, a very dark room, and the government would give him longitude and latitude by numbers. And he could sit there at a table, and his mind could leave where he was at, go to those coordinates, and tell the government what was at those coordinates. And his accuracy was very, very high. He was questioned not only by like the CIA or National Defense or whatever, but even NASA, the space people. They once came to him because they had a satellite that was going to Jupiter. And they came from Florida, NASA people, and they came to see him at the Bowery. And they went to see him, and they said, "What could we expect when our spacecraft gets to Jupiter? What can we expect there?" And he said, "You'll find that, like Saturn, Jupiter has rings around it." And they said, "Rings?" They go, "Rings. And the rings are ice particles, and that's what you're going to see." Well, they thanked him and they left. They went back to Florida, and so the engineers that were there and the scientists, they said, "Did you really go to New York to talk to this guy Ingo Swann?" And they said, "Yes." "And what did he say?" And they said, "Well, he said that the Jupiter has rings just like Saturn, and we could expect those rings are made out of ice, crystals." Well, they laughed at him. They said, "What a waste of time. There's no rings up there. There's nothing like that. You just wasted time going up there to see this man." Well, about a week or so later, the spacecraft made it to Jupiter, and when it made it to Jupiter, they found out that Jupiter had rings just like Saturn, and had ice particles that were around it, which caused the rings. The two gentlemen that came up to New York, they went up to these scientists and they said, "Now what do you have to say about that?" They just put their face down. They wouldn't say anything. They were too embarrassed. But the point being is that this man was capable of doing that. And I know you find it very hard to believe, but knowing him for as many years as I have, trust me when I tell you, the man is that good.
Did he give you, yes, he did pass away a few years ago. Did he give you lessons and instruction in how to improve your ability?
Yes, he did. And I'll tell you right now, he yelled at me a lot. He had very little patience, and he would tell me, he'd give me like exercises, and I would do it. And if I couldn't do all the things that he wanted me to do, he would just start yelling at me and say, "Now try it again, try it again, try it again." And I would be there for a long time trying to get these things. Sometimes I'd be successful, but a lot of times I wasn't. I wasn't him. I wasn't as good as him. My talents were other places. I had talents that he couldn't do, and he had talents that I couldn't do. For example, he said to me that in these lofts that he had, on the upper loft, he says, tenants don't last there. They only last a little while, and they leave. He said, I want to know why they leave. He said, it's empty right now. Can you go up there and tell me if you see anything to figure out why they leave? So I went up there, looked around, and then I could see backwards, and I could see the way it was probably at the turn of the last century. I would say probably before 1910, but after 1899. And I saw all the boxes that were up there. I should say crates. Their crates were up there. And I saw a bathroom that was in the corner, and I could see that a man died in that bathroom. And that I could see the police coming up there, removing the body from the toilet and bringing it down. And I could see all this, and it was a very heavy feeling that was up in that room. So I came down, and I said to him about the bathroom, and I told him about what I saw in the corner, and these men coming up and all the boxes that were up there. And they said, where was the bathroom? And I said, at the top of the stairs. Now, in real life, that bathroom is at the other wall. So at one time, it was near the south wall instead of the north wall. So when I came down, I told him about it. He got a blueprint of the building from like 1885. That's when it was built. And he laid out this diagram, I should say the blueprint. And as he did, he went up to that floor, and he pointed his finger where the toilet was, and it was exactly at the top of the stairs. So it was completely accurate where that bathroom was. Of course, now it's not there. It's at the other end. And as I was describing the room, he was saying that everything that I was saying was correct when the building was built. And he thanked me for it, and it was something he couldn't do. So, we left it at that, but he was just a curious person. He wanted to know just what was happening up there, what happened years ago that he's not familiar with, and I did it for him.
I was acquainted with Ingo myself and appreciated his eccentric personality. I did have a few times there in his townhouse down in the Bowery, and you and I do recall visited with him
right.
a few times over the years. Karl, you have an intriguing chapter on Ingo in Absent Witness, and lots more information about some of the things, folks, that Karl shared with Ingo. We've got to pause now to take a short break for a few minutes. When we come back, Karl, I'd like to get your take on what it's like to communicate with someone who has just passed on, and the funeral is being held for them, and they are there at their own
right.
funeral. So we'll be back in just a few moments. Karl Petry, my guest tonight. You're listening to Strange Dimensions on KGRradio.com.
Would odors, mold, and mildew describe your basement or crawl space? It doesn't have to be that way. Transform them into a fresh, healthy, usable one with the technologically advanced Wave Moisture Control Units. The computerized operation maximizes moisture control and also expels harmful radon, combustion gases, and numerous other pollutants. Dehumidifiers are old technology that do nothing for air quality and waste energy. Wave units are intelligent, self-monitoring, do not need maintenance, and will save you hundreds in electricity. Wave units are still running effectively over 15 years. They've been tested and installed in public and military housing and by property managers nationwide. Buy a unit now, and if your home is not fresher and drier, you can return it for a full refund for up to 12 months. What have you got to lose? Call now. 1-888-618-WAVE. 1-888-618-WAVE. Or visit mydryhome.com. That's mydryhome.com.
Wave Home Solutions for a healthy, comfortable home.
Well, Jason, I've got to tell you, you're pretty much everything this company is looking for in an entry-level candidate.
Great.
Your resume isn't quite what we're used to, but you've got a fantastic work ethic.
Thank you.
And I'm impressed by how you carry yourself.
So, should we talk about the job?
What? The job? Oh, sorry. Yeah, I have no way of recruiting or even meeting you. This interview didn't happen.
It may sound ridiculous, and that's because it kind of is. There's a huge pool of talent your company is missing out on. Meet the grads of life. Who are they? Talent worth knowing about. Young adults of unique determination and experience. An ideal fit for your company in an entry-level position, internship, or even mentorship. They might not have every qualification you typically look for, but they're exactly who your company needs.
Man, we really could have used him.
Don't miss out on a resource many innovative companies have already discovered. Go to gradsoflife.org to learn how to find, cultivate, and train this great pool of untapped talent. Brought to you by the Ad Council and gradsoflife.org.
It's not a lifestyle we chose. We were born this way. KGRAradio.com.
Welcome back to Strange Dimensions Radio with Rosemary Ellen Guiley. My guest tonight, Karl Petry, medium, retrocognition expert who's worked on many intriguing paranormal cases, crime cases, has a television series in the works about his life. We've just been talking about his relationship with Ingo Swann, the famous remote viewer Ingo Swann, who passed away a few years ago, and how instrumental Ingo was shaping Karl's career and ability. Karl, right before we left for the break, I mentioned that I wanted to ask you about the dead at their own funerals. People have often heard or wondered about the ability of people who've passed on to attend their own funerals, their own wake services. And you've had some very interesting experiences when you've gone to those services and suddenly you're in communication with the person who's just passed over.
Yes, that's happened a number of times. When I do go to a wake, in my heart, I wish that they're not there. That they crossed over and everything will be just calm when I go there. But that's not always the case. I recall one case that I went down to South Jersey. A friend of mine, his father passed away, and he had a contracting business. And I went to the wake. I was there with my wife, and as we walked in, then all of a sudden I heard his voice. He was making comments of the people that were there. And this man, his name is Frank, he came into the funeral parlor, and I heard this man as clear as if he's standing right next to me. He goes, "There's Frank, that SOB," but he said the whole thing. "He owes me $6,000. And he thinks just because I'm dead that he could get away with it. You know, he's a no-good, rotten SOB." And, you know, he went on and on cursing this guy out. And then as I was, walking towards the casket, he saw this, the priest who was going to do the service. And the priest came from some country in Africa. And he could barely speak English. And he said, "Look who they got to do the service." And he started calling this guy all kinds of names. He goes, now he's going to say it, and no one's going to understand a single word this guy is saying. And he went on and on about it. So I went up to his son, and I said, you know, I think Frank owes your father $6,000. And he said, really? I says, well, I would say so. So what he did is he actually went over to Frank at the end of the wake, and he said, you know, Frank, what are we going to do about that $6,000 that you owe my father? And the man looked like he was in shock because he thought he was going to get away with it. I guess he never thought that his son would know about the $6,000, which his son didn't. But his dead father told me about the $6,000, and since then, that $6,000 is paid back, thanks to the deceased who told me that. There was another case where this attorney who knows me and knows the people from the Parapsychology Foundation in New York, and she knows how good and accurate, you know, what I see is. So her mother died, and the wake was in Hackensack, New Jersey. And I went there with the parapsychologist. Her name is Joanne McMahon, and her husband. And we went to the wake. And as I walked in, I looked at the front of the room where the casket was, and I saw the deceased sitting in a chair right next to the casket. Now, here her body is in the casket, and she is still sitting in a seat, and she's crocheting. So I went up to the casket, and the woman who's, you know, the deceased who is crocheting, she says, I'm with Danny now. I'm with Danny. And so I just went around her, and I came back to the seat, and her daughter comes up to me and says, Karl, did you see anything? I said, yes. Your mother's right next to the casket, and she's crocheting. She goes, you know, she only picked that up about 6 months ago, but she loved doing it. And that's what she's doing? I says, yeah. And I says, but she said she's with Danny now. Was that your father? She goes, no. I says, well, she said she's with Danny. And so she looked around, and she's thinking about it, and then she came back, and she said, Danny was the next-door neighbor who she knew, and he died about a month ago. And now she's saying he's with Danny. I says, yeah, that's what she's saying. Then she said, what is she wearing? And I described a blouse that had these tiny little flowers on it. And I said, she's wearing these green pants, and I think you call them stirrups that go underneath your foot. And I said, she's wearing these green pants. She goes, that was my mother's favorite outfit. She goes, when she died, that was the first thing I took of hers, and I threw it in the garbage. I didn't even want to give it to Goodwill. I hated that so much. She always wore that. I says, well, she's still wearing it. And so she says, well, that's my mother for you. And she walked away because she was used to me doing this sort of thing. So it really didn't faze her. But that's, you know, a couple instances where the dead speak. Well, I should say that there's one other time, and I mentioned this in the book. This court reporter I know, because I used to work with court reporters, and her husband's father died. And she knew what I could do, and, you know, my track record for, you know, talking to the dead. And she said, Karl, can you come to the wake? And I said, well, I was planning that anyway, so I'll be there. Well, it's really odd because when I got to the funeral parlor and I walked into the room, the entire room, all the people in the room, they stopped talking and they all turned and they looked at me. It gave me a very eerie feeling. And I walked up to the casket, and here was this man laid out, and they had the American flag there. He was a veteran of World War II. And I walked up to the casket, and all of a sudden, I hear a man talking to me. But he's speaking to me in a German accent. Now, I'm looking at a man with pictures of him from World War II, the American Army, the American flag, and I hear this man speaking with a very strong German accent. And he starts telling me about his son, how much he loves his son. He's telling me about the house that they used to live in. And what was very odd about it, the man was talking so fast that I told the family, I says, I'm only getting 10%. The man is talking nonstop. He is not stopping. He just keeps giving me information, and he's showing me images. And I says, and then I looked at his son, and I said, you know, I don't understand something. I said, why is he talking with a German accent? He goes, my father spoke with a German accent. He was born in Germany, never lost the accent all these years, and that's why he's speaking with a German accent. And I said, why is he talking so much? And he said, my father lost the ability to speak over a year ago, and my father loved to talk. He said, so when he was trying to communicate with us, he would write on a pad what he wanted. You're the first person that he could actually talk to since over a year ago, because he died and he still couldn't speak. So here was a man who was dead, talking to me, showing me images of the house where he grew up, telling me about his son, telling me about the family, on and on and on. So it surprised the family. It surprised me. But it was a good feeling when I left. Everybody felt pretty good about it. And really, so did I.
Should we always assume then that the dead are present, especially when we're having their funeral services for them?
Well, after my experiences with these families, I would say, well, in these particular cases, they spoke to me, but then again, they could be there and I didn't notice, or it didn't come to my attention. So I would say there's a pretty good percentage in favor of that they do come to their own wakes or their own funerals. I would say so.
And what a difference in these cases you've described with the first fellow who was kind of in a bad mood. And we can't just assume that because someone passes over that all of a sudden they're all love and light if they've been, kind of tough to deal with on this side of the veil.
Oh, please. It's really strange because people get the impression that when somebody dies, that somehow the good Lord gives them a harp and a cloud to sit on, and now they're so wonderful and they're so understanding and they're peaceful and they forgive everybody. And boy, is that a fallacy! I mentioned in the book where I went to a funeral. I should say a wake, and when I went to the casket, the woman in the casket, she told me, she says, I told, and she mentioned her daughter's name, I hate her husband. She never should have married him. He's no damn good. And she went on and on about how she hated him. She goes, I got a hold of this guy before he married my daughter, and I offered him money. I offered him thousands of dollars. He would just take off and leave my daughter alone. So as she's telling me all this, and here she's in a casket, the daughter comes up to me and she said, is my mother saying anything to you? And I said, she really didn't care for your husband, did she? She goes, oh, no, she hated him. She hated that I married him. And she went on and on telling me exactly what the mother said, except the mother used some profanity and the daughter didn't.
And what do you do with this information? You must have some cases where you feel that you can't communicate what you're hearing to the living.
That's true. A lot of times it's in your best interest to keep your mouth shut. There are some very sad things that I've experienced, and I feel like the dog who's chasing the car. What does he do when he catches it? And what happens is that I hear some very private things and some horrible things against a family member, and it's like, boy, I better keep my mouth shut with this. This will cause a riot. One person that contacted me, their son died, and she showed me a picture, and right after that, I could see the hospital room. I saw him in the bed. I knew I knew what was going through his head, and then I noticed that he hated his mother. And she says, do you see him? And I said, yes. I said, did he tell you the day that the doctors came in and said that there was nothing more they could do for him? He said, bad news on the doorstep. She goes, yeah, I remember him saying that. What a crazy thing for him to say. I said, it's a line from American Pie. And she goes, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, he liked that song, American Pie. It was always going through his head. That song was written, I think, and it came out in 1972, sung by Don McLean. And so he was quoting a lot of things from that song. And then when she said, I don't know what you're talking about, then I started to hum the song, and I started to sing the song. She goes, oh, that's American Pie? I said, yeah. She goes, that was his favorite song. He listened to it all the time. And I said, uh-huh. And then the deceased said to me, I'd rather die than ever go home with my mother again. I hated her. She was no good. And he's telling me on the other side that if given a chance between living and going back to live with her or dying, he'd rather die. Now, it had to be accurate, because when I started telling her about American Pie, she had no idea what I was talking about. But as I was quoting these different things that he was saying, she acknowledged it. So there's no way in the world that I could fabricate this or whatever. She just confirmed everything that he was telling me.
This is such a reminder to those of us on this side of the veil that we really do need to put our house in order while we have the chance before we pass over. And that if we are having difficult relationships, we need to work on them to heal them. And to not leave, to not depart with bad feelings, grudges, unfinished business. It really is amazing what you're picking up from people who have passed over in those situations. And yet there are other cases where people have nothing but love to say. They want to convey how much, they loved their family members during their life. But we don't think about these things while we're on this side of the veil.
Right. That's
now,
very true.
We're fast approaching the end of our time here together, Karl, and so many things I want to ask you. But your book, Absent Witness, where does absent witness come from, and what does it mean?
Well, think about the words. A witness to somebody who's not there. Because I can see things in great detail from the past, yet I'm not there. So I'm an absent witness.
And who gave you that title?
It was Dr. Joanne McMahon. She was the director of the Parapsychology Foundation that was located in Manhattan, New York. And when I first met her, I was having all kinds of problems. You have to understand that at the time, I knew nothing about being a medium or psychic abilities or anything. I just was going out of my mind. I was walking down the street with my wife one day, and I was, not a kid. And I was walking with her, and I said, when you walk down the street and you see houses, do you ever see them change the way they used to be years ago? She goes, no. I says, when you walk by cars on the street, do you ever see that they turn from modern-day cars to, let's say, cars from the 1930s or 40s, and you could look in the window and see what's on the seats, on those cars? She goes, no. And I says, I could. So I just told her about that, and she's like, maybe you should see somebody about this. So I went out and I tried to speak to different people about it. There was a psychologist in town, and I went to him and I said, let me explain to you. I says, when I'm around, I could see things the way they were before. And I could hear things, and I said, what is that? What could that be? And he said, what kind of insurance do you have? And then I says, I have the standard insurance, whatever. That's not the question. It's like, what is this that I'm saying? And he goes, how'd you get along with your father? How'd you get along with your mother? And I realized he just doesn't get it. But then I was referred to by a mutual friend that I spoke to, and they said that there was a priest in Summit, and that I should see him. So they gave me his name and his phone number, and I called, and I said that I'd like to speak to you because I hear you do things with the, out of the ordinary or paranormal. And he said, sure. So it was a Saturday, and I went there, and I walked up the stairs, and he sat at his desk because he had psychic abilities. And when I walked up the stairs, he looked at me, and as I approached him, he said, "You're Karl Petry." I said, "Yes." He goes, "I knew the minute you walked into the building that you were here." And when I started to explain to him about things, and I says, for example, you see that wall behind you? And I started describing the way the wall looked about 15, 20 years ago. And he said, "You're very, very accurate." He says, "You're beyond anything we could do here." And he gave me the name of the Parapsychology Foundation in New York. That's how I got to go to the Parapsychology Foundation, and that's when I met Dr. McMahon.
Some of the cases that you've dealt with are concern the dead who don't want to be forgotten, and we do forget them. So many people over time. If you could describe that case from Island Heights, New Jersey. I was so intrigued by that in the book. The mystery woman who did not want to be forgotten 100 years after she died.
Right. My cousin was on a ski trip, and they were going up, I believe, to like New Hampshire. And there was one of the people that was on this bus that was going up there. She looked at the people on a bus and she said, "Does anybody know one of these ghost hunters, somebody who knows about ghosts? Because I have a problem. I want somebody to help me out with it." And my cousin said, "Well, maybe my cousin Karl, could help you." So she told her, to my cousin, she said, "I bought a house in Island Heights. It's a really beautiful little village type of place, and down near the Jersey Shore." And she said, "I bought this little, like a cottage." She goes, "It's all dark inside. It has all this wood." And she says, "I bought it because I wanted a summer home for our family." She had a very big family. She says, "My kids go inside, and all they want to do is leave. They don't like the inside of the place. I have a dog, and a dog, he whimpers when he goes into the building, and when he looks up to the second floor, he won't go to the second floor. He backs up, he starts walking backwards, and he whimpers, and he just wants to go outside." She goes, "And it's really a nice place, but, there's something wrong with this house." So she asked me to go. So, I should say she called me, and I said I would go down to investigate it. Now, you have to understand that anything that I do, investigations or anything like that, I don't charge. I never have. I just do it. And in a sense, it costs me because I got to pay for my fuel, tolls, or whatever to go to these places. But I don't mind because it's just something I do. So I went to this house in Island Heights, and I pulled up to the place, and I could sense that there was somebody like in this building watching me, watching every move that I made. They were just watching me. And when this woman showed up, I said, "Do you ever have the feeling like somebody's watching you in the house?" She confirmed that. She says, "Yes, I have that feeling all the time." Well, going into this house, I could hear a voice. And this little voice, tiny little voice, said, "In the wood. In the wood. In the wood." And I said, "I'm hearing a voice that's saying, 'in the wood.'" I says, does that mean anything to you? She goes, no. And then I heard her voice come back and say, the boys are coming in on the train. The boys are coming in on the train. And I said, is there a train here? She goes, no, they stopped the trains here about 1888. She said they were coming. There was a train that used to bring people from Philadelphia to Island Heights. And this was a summer resort for them. This was a religious community, and this is where they used to come. And I says, well, she keeps telling me about the boys, and she's telling me about it's in the wood. So it was summertime, and I says, let me come back a little while, maybe in about 3 weeks, when some of the colors are down, because my ability is stronger when there's less color. And I came back in 3 weeks, and I heard the voice again. It's in the wood, in the wood, in the wood. So I had the woman was with me, and also I had somebody else with me. And we started going through the house. I started hitting the walls because it's what's called wainscoting. Dark wainscoting was throughout the entire house. So I'm hitting and hitting. I just keep knocking on the walls, see if there's anything loose. Just keep knocking on every wall that you see. So we're all hitting the walls, and I just keep hearing a voice. It's in the wood. It's in the wood. Well, I went up to the second floor. The voice got louder. I said, come up to the second floor. The voice is louder. So we started hitting all the walls and everything, and still nothing was happening. Then I saw a ladder that was going up to the attic. So I climbed this ladder, and when I got up to the attic, the voice was much louder. I mean, very, very loud. And so I looked, and the ceiling, the floor was made out of 1x3s. And I'm not the smallest guy in the world, and I realized if I walked up in the attic, that would probably fall right through and land on the second floor, or worse, the first floor. So
Carl, we've got about a minute left.
Okay. What happened is I put my hand through a beam, and as I put my hand down, I touched a piece of metal. And as I pulled this piece of metal up, it was the image of a woman wearing a crucifix. And the loud noise of it's in the wood, it's in the wood, it stopped immediately. This was an image of a woman who wanted me to find this tin picture of her so that she would not be forgotten. And the woman had plans on knocking down the house. So she knew about it. She wanted to make sure that people saw who she was, that she did exist, that she was not forgotten. And now that picture is in a museum at Island Heights. The woman spoke to me 100 years after she died, and now she's not forgotten.
That is one of the most amazing stories in your book. You've also got a 9/11 story in the book, paupers' graves, meetings with relatives. Truly a great read from start to finish. Karl, I want to thank you for being with me tonight. Karl Petry, medium and retrocognition expert. Where can people reach you? You're on Facebook, I understand.
Yes, you can reach me by Facebook. And you could order the book from Amazon.
Amazon, and it's also in ebook format as well. Well, we'll have to have you back to talk about some of these other cases, especially the dead who don't want to be forgotten. And meanwhile, I'll see you down in Mothman this weekend. Thank you so much.
And thank you for having me on the show.
You're very welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to Rosemary Ellen Guiley, Strange Dimensions Radio on KGRAradio.com. Please stay tuned for Fade to Black with Jimmy Church.